sat and read for 5 years. I just read to find the answers to all the struggles that I've been having. One of the struggles was about feminism. Oh God, I struggled with feminism. I had these two lovely friends who were very active feminists in Melbourne. And I'd say to them, tell me again about feminism. And they were so lovely, they would just take me through it again, slowly and again. But one of the things I found difficult was, how do you think about the different disadvantages or power relations across gender and across ethnicity and across class? How do you make sense of the fact that there are these different axes of difference, which clearly all have an influence? How should we think about that? Shall we think about only class, or only gender, or only ethnicity? What do you think? How do you make sense of the way these things operate together? So that was one of my struggles, reading and reading and reading. In fact, there was a very important feminist lady who died last week, named Mel Hooks, who was also part of that reading. So there's a challenge for you. Can you write that challenge down? I'm not asking for an answer, but how do I integrate these different axes of power relations in making sense of my world? Is that a good question? Might take you some years to work on. The other thing I read about was political economy, trying to make sense of how the global economy works. I think that's something I'd urge you to think through. Anyway, so then, I'll be very brief about La Trobe. Then I came to La Trobe in 1995, and I met this young woman who was wandering around the corridors of La Trobe saying, please, can I have, she had a doctoral scholarship. She was wandering around the corridors of La Trobe saying, who's going to give me, supervise my scholarship? And she wanted to study the management of health systems in China. And of course, knowing nothing about the management of health systems in China, I offered immediately to provide her with supervision. And she produced a really terrific doctoral report, doctoral study, and a number of very good papers out of that. She came from a hospital system associated with the Kunming Medical College, and we went to the Kunming Medical College to say, well, can we do surveys, questionnaire surveys of your staff, and in particular your managers, to find out the nature of the problems that they are facing in their management of the hospital system. And of course, the boss of the hospital system said, sure, you can have access to my managers, but on condition that you set up a teaching program to teach the managers what you learn from what you're doing, what we are doing. This is an amazing period in the history of China, because under the planned economy, the managers of the hospitals were really just post boxes. The decisions were taken at the top level and they filtered down, and the managers were told that they will just implement these decisions, right or wrong, good or bad, implement these decisions because they've come down from the top. But it was seriously challenged because in 1978, when Deng Xiaoping came to power, the beginning of the sort of capitalist sector of the economy was starting to go.
and he thought that we're going to get economic growth by inviting private sector industry to work. So he invited the private sector in. But the private sector was struggling. He was worried that the state-owned sector was very inefficient compared to the private sector. Now, why was it inefficient? Some of you guys must know. Why was the state-owned sector so inefficient compared to the private sector? Let's say in the late 1980s, early 1990s. If you have Chinese heritage, this is your history. Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I think the private sector is more
Put
profit-based.
your mask in, I'm sorry, I don't hear you.
So basically the private sector is more profit-based, and the state sector is like more people-based.
The state sector was carrying childcare, education, health insurance, aged care, because of this concept of the welfare of the welfare of the whole unit was the responsibility of the organisation, whereas the private sector was not responsible for any of those things. So there were inefficiencies in the state-owned sector, but on top of that, the state-owned sector had these welfare responsibilities. And so part of the Deng Xiaoping period was to remove these responsibilities from the enterprise. And initially, there was nothing to take it up. Initially, there was very little in terms of, so many people were finding it much more difficult to get access to healthcare because the hospitals needed to charge money. So suddenly, from being a free socialist health system, it became a very capitalist health system. And these are some of the challenges that the hospital managers at that time were facing. So again, we get this idea that you can be a manager in that system and be struggling with how do I pay my staff, how do I ensure clean utensils for my surgery, how do I pay my staff, how do I deliver good care, without necessarily knowing that you're facing a massive structural change, and that's a huge structural change. Took another 20 years to be properly confronted and to develop a universal health insurance system for China. Anyway, so that's been a lot of fun working in China over the last 20 years, 15, 20 years. And William has been a central part of most of that with me.
That program still runs, the public health in China program still runs.
Yeah, the program's still going. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So, which brings me to COVID. I should say a bit about the People's Health Movement. The People's Health Movement is as I said, a network of organisations around the world. But the underlying theory of change is that the idea of that governments are important, but governments who are not subject to the accountability of their people can make mistakes, can be corrupted, can look after the interests of special interest people. And so a strong social movement in favour, driving towards decent healthcare, driving towards action around what we call the social determinants of health, was an important part of this goal. So just briefly about so social movements. Think about social movements. Write down social movements and look it up and think about where you fit and how a social movement can be part of social change. So part of my work over the last 2 years with the People's Health Movement has been looking at the COVID disaster. And it was written
foreshadowed from the beginning that we were going to have a shocking inequality in access to vaccines. I don't know if you're familiar with the fact that the rich world now has something like 80% vaccine coverage. Australia's got 92%. And most developing countries are lucky to be 10%, some are 20% coverage. And that was part of the original plan. The original plan was to establish an international body for procuring vaccines for developing countries. And it was explicitly to be restricted to a 20%, to sufficient vaccines to cover 20% of the population. And then when Pfizer came along, Pfizer said, we're not sharing our production skills with anybody. And so in August last year, the Indian government and the South African government brought forward a proposal to the World Trade Organization that the intellectual property laws which enable Pfizer to restrict the supply of vaccines were to be challenged, were to be lifted, so that poor countries could build factories to start producing those vaccines. So it's sort of where we started. It's the idea of powerful organisations which are supposed to be doing good works who get captured by powerful private interest. That's a challenge for you. I think it's time I stopped. I'm open to...
Well, you can go hence Omicron.
Yeah. Well, then of course you get a place where new variants will develop because people haven't got immunisation. So we get Omicron as a consequence of variants which wouldn't be coming nearly as fast if everybody was vaccinated. Okay. Now I want to know what you produced in your answers to my questions. Snapshots of history. What did you write down for snapshots of history?
It talked about the pass laws in the sharpened passengers.
Yeah.
And also in 1973 with them passing universal healthcare.
Yep. Anyone else? Snapshots of history? Yeah.
When the state
Do you mind taking your mask off? It's cutting you out.
when the state banks of like Victoria and South Australia collapsed, and then the long boom of like the economic increase that was benefiting people, and then in the late 1970s the economic recession, so then the government decided to like increase the rate of education.
Keep in mind that idea of people coping with difficult personal issues, individual issues, without understanding that there's a structural thing happening behind it. What else? Did you write down something under snapshots of history? Pardon?
I wrote about the state banks collapsing and the recession related that.
Did anyone write down about the challenges the health system in China faced from 1978 through to 1990? It's very, very significant for people of Chinese origin if you're watching what's happening there, because it reflects so sharply the way in which that massive change took place and how and why it took place. Okay, what about career choices? Did anyone write down anything about turning points, how you manage turning points in your career? No. No. Yes? No. Yes, please.
So I wrote trying not to be pushed to expectations of try to do something
Thank you.
you're passionate about.
Yeah. I think the message I would say is do it like as the Chinese say, feeling the stones to cross the river. Don't think that you're going to get. Don't have the long-term plan. Find your way through different career choices, but that's a different thing from finding your way through life, which is so you can find your way through different jobs, but you are still finding your way through life, if you get what I mean. Did anyone write down anything about learning about finding your way through life? Wouldn't offend me if you didn't. Yeah.
Well, I kind of goes along the lines, I said take it as it comes and like work in the moment and do what you need to do to figure out what you want to do.
Yeah. Thank you. What else did I ask you? Ideas about how the world works? Did you get any ideas about how the world works? Did you write down something?
People putting works for the rich people, but not for everybody.
Sorry, say it again.
So people putting works and times to sacrifice for the rich people, not for everybody.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Also about how social inequalities, about any different demographic of kind of person from different cultures and anything that any different people and the inequalities surrounding that affects health and health services.
Yeah. Thank you. No, I would have. The bottom line for me is the idea of thinking about the immediate needs of people that you're working with, or groups or communities, but making sure that you seek to understand the macro, the longer term, the structural, so that when you're working on particular issues, you're working on the immediate issues. I'm not suggesting that you don't do the right thing as it appears on a daily basis to you, but that you do so in a way that also contributes to changing the big structures. Gee, I think I should stop.
I think that that's absolutely